Hello and welcome to Eye of Gnosis Tarot. My name is Ewan and today we are looking at the Ten of Cups in the Thoth Tarot deck. This is of course the last number card in the suit of cups, and when we have finished this card we will be going to the court cards. Now if you haven't already, I highly recommend going to look at the Suit of Cups playlist that I've created to give much more context to this card, as well as the Suit of Wands playlist, because in that playlist I give much more information about the numbers of the cards, and the numbers of course transpose across all the suits and have an inherent meaning within them. So without, and before I move into the card actually, if you want to skip straight to the Divinatory Interpretations, there is a timestamp below in the description. As I always say, please watch this video at least once so you have a full understanding of what you're looking at in your readings. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the Ten of Cups. So here we see 10 bronze chalices arranged in the Tree of Life formation that we see in Kabbalah and informs the entire tarot. The handles of these bronze cups look like ram's horns, and we see this deep red and orange background. Pure water is spraying from the top cup, which represents Kether, and is overflowing through Tiphereth, Yesod and Malkuth. And the most prominent part of this card is of course the actual tree in the background, which is red and has this brain-like canopy. Transposed across the, or should I say embossed or inscribed on the top cup of Kether, we have the sigil of Mars, and it's barely visible, but we see the sigil of Pisces on the stem of the Malkuth cup. We're going to look into the meaning behind the card now. So once again we find ourselves in Malkuth, the physical realm that we pass through each day. The endless flow of harmonious emotion that we saw in Yesod, the number 9, has been suddenly halted by the limitations of matter, and it does this to provide a necessary arena in which consciousness can forget and lose itself in. And this is the concept of Maya that we talked about in the Ten of Wands, and is of course the concept that the Matrix films play around with. The periodic table has now been completed, and millions of chemical compounds populate the material universe in all their spectacular variety. In other words, the stage has been set, and now consciousness awaits the audience, which is, of course, itself. As consciousness has descended from Kether and through the Sephiroth, it has already experienced a great deal of itself and expanded itself and its potential to acquire further nuance and understanding of its own nature. This is essentially why we have numbers and why we have the sequence of the Sephiroth. This is universe, this is the consciousness, the God, whatever you want to call it, expanding itself constantly. And in Tiphereth and Yesod, it came to fully understand and know itself respectively, bathing in the existential bliss of its own unlimited unfurling. And we saw this in the number 9, Yesod, in the 9 of Wands and the 9 of Cups. This concept that the number 9 is an open infinity. The problem is understanding and knowing its infinite nature, which is a perception far beyond our normal conscious state, creates a limitation for consciousness. In other words, the surprise has been lost because now consciousness understands and knows itself fully. It knows it is infinite, and therefore it will never be surprised again. So we have a bit of a paradox there, where the knowledge of its unlimited nature creates a limitation for consciousness. However, the point at which that limitation manifests, so does Malkuth, and this is why the physical realm appears so limited to us, and in fact is limited. So whilst the material universe of Malkuth is limited, it is also how consciousness allows itself to be surprised again. So as soon as that contradiction is played, that paradox, consciousness forgets itself. And therefore, things become surprising again. Now, within the limitations of matter, there is no one singular being that can comprehend the whole of existence. That's how the universe forgets. Through our physical bodies, the fact we have hippocampuses and brains that will decay and die. Yet that existence can experience being in that limited state that I've just talked about, and thus creates a diversity of experiences to enjoy. Here we see how consciousness has successfully created its own ruse of forgetting, so that it may eternally experience the bliss and joy of returning back to itself again and again and again. And in this way, it is at last satiated. Hence the name of the card, Satiety or Satiety. And yes, you can pronounce it both ways. So please put your pitchforks away in the comments section. And this is the idea we talked about in the suit of, the card, the Two of Cups, whereby love is the concept that consciousness is seeing, returning back to itself, whether this is through the mystical experience, which is essentially coming from Malkuth through Yesod, Tippereth and back to Kether, or through love with another being, whereby that being is us and we are it, or they. So now we're going to look at the symbolism behind this card, and we see Mars's heavy presence here in this deep orange and red background. And also we see it with the ram's heads on the chalices, these horns, because the ram is of course Aries, and Aries is ruled by Mars. And indeed, Mars is the Roman equivalent of Ares. Ares is the Greek god of war, Mars is the Roman god of war. And when we look at the zodiacal year, we see that Aries follows Pisces and is indeed the first sign of the zodiac. It is when spring begins at the spring equinox. And this is when the zodiacal year begins. It doesn't begin on the 1st of January, it begins on the spring equinox. And it is very poignant that when we look at the Decan wheel, now the Decan wheel is the zodiacal year, but with all the tarot cards placed upon it, we find the Ten of Cups right at the end of Pisces and just before Aries season begins. So it really does embody the fullness that forces the seasonal cycle to renew again. And this is the end that will create a new beginning. Now when we look at the top chalice, we've already talked about this briefly when we describe the card, we see it is in the position of Kether, and this canopy of the Tree of Life very much looks like a brain, and this is not a mistake. And the same applies for when we look at the bottom chalice, which represents Malkuth. It is in this yonic design at the bottom. And this is the concept that the macrocosm and the microcosm are the same, and that our bodies are simply echoes of the structure of the universe. And of course this crosses over with the chakra system. And indeed the Kabbalah Tree of Life is an expanded version of the chakra system. So when we look at the numbers 2 and 3, these are the third eye chakra, but split into our two visual eyes. That's just an example. And when we think about this in terms of the chakras, it makes a lot of sense that we have Kether, the crown chakra, in the top of the brain, and we have Malkuth, the root chakra, in our genitalia. And indeed, this crosses over with another tree of life known as Yggdrasil. And Yggdrasil is the tree of life in Nordic mythology, represents the structure of the universe in that belief system. And we can really see Kether as a parallel to Asgard, the realm of the gods, which is of course our brain, or the different parts of us, whether they are in the unconscious, subconscious or conscious. And of course at the bottom we have hell, and that's hell spelt with a single L. Not the same as the Christian hell, although they did name it after the pagan realm. And this is where the ancestors live. And when we look at the body, the human body, it makes a lot of sense that our ancestors live in our genitalia as our DNA. So what is Mars in Pisces? Well, Mars in Pisces can be summed up as living in a dream. Consciousness is doing inside its being. And in this sense, we are sleepwalking through this reality, as represented by Malkuth. And this is the Vedic and Buddhist notion that the Brahman, the whole, the entirety of consciousness, also known as the Godhead, is purposely lost itself in the illusion of Maya, because it is basically dreaming it. So this is Kether is dreaming Malkuth, and this is again connected to that idea that 10 is just another 1. And in this dream, or at least believing the dream is real, we have the concept that ignorance is bliss. And when we go back to the Matrix, this is of course when Cypher decides he doesn't want to know anymore that he's in the Matrix and wants to just return back to it, completely oblivious to the dark secret. However, as we know, ignorance is not always bliss, and it does imply an inevitable suffering at some point in our journey. And at this point, when consciousness is suffering within Malkuth, which it will, because it is the polar opposite of love, they are both the same though, in that they are both an experience. And that suffering points us towards love, and love points us towards suffering. And when this happens, when we are suffering, the way we are pointed back to love, knowing ourselves, coming back to consciousness, is of course through this central pillar. And I've talked about this in previous cards. I call it the get out of jail free card of consciousness, whereby it returns back to itself through the mystical experience or through love of another person. Or another thing for that matter. And this returning back to self is known as the Atman in Vedic and Buddhist traditions. And the Atman translates as self, but this is self with a capital S. It is pure consciousness. The Western equivalent would be the soul, although it is a bit more nuanced than the soul. It's not this idea that there is a God and a soul, rather the two are one and the same in Vedic and Buddhist traditions. And indeed, the deeper we go into Buddhist traditions, we realise that even that is a fallacy, and that everything is actually just one. And because of that, nothing actually exists. And if that sounds very cryptic, please do go back and look at the Ace of Cups and the Ace of Wands videos. And in the future, I will be doing the Major Arcana card, the Fool, which goes much more into depth about the concept of nothing. Now, there's a little couple of myths here within the Vedic tradition which are worth pointing out with regards to this card and the nature of Maya and how it connects to our emotions. Of course, this is the Ten of Cups. And this is the figure of Mohini that we're going to follow through these myths. For those of you who don't know, Mohini is the only female avatar of Vishnu, and she was created to entice the demons, also known as asuras, into giving back the elixir of life to the gods, the nectar of immortality. And in this sense we can say perhaps this is the parts of our consciousness that cause suffering, the parts of our ego that cause suffering, the demons, the asuras, have now taken our life. And the only way to get them to bring life back is by playing their game, and this game is the material game. Hence, Vishnu embodies Maya in Mohini. And by playing the game, Vishnu is able to attain the elixir of life, life itself, and give it back to the gods. And these are these higher parts of our mind that help us rather than hinder us. And of course, the reason why this is Vishnu, if we look at it on a more philosophical sense, is that Vishnu represents maintenance, the middle point between beginnings and endings, and is really the present moment. And this is, of course, the Vaishnavite argument that out of the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva, they believe that it is Vishnu who is the supreme embodiment of the Godhead, because there is only ever the present moment. And again, this is a tale of how being in the present moment in material reality will bring you back to who you really are and save you from your demons, so to speak. And there is another tale here where Mohini entices Shiva, the god of endings and destruction. And the reason why Mohini does this, why Vishnu does it, is to teach Shiva a lesson. And in this tale, we're going to come to what that lesson is. But first of all, in this tale, Shiva is in his Rudra aspect, which is the Vedic equivalent of Mars. And he asks Vishnu to show him Mohini because he's intrigued at how beautiful she must have been to entice the asuras, the demons. And when Vishnu does so and becomes Mohini, Shiva completely loses himself in the beauty and spectacle wonder of Mohini. And in fact, he does so to such an extent that he nearly commits infidelity against his wife Parvati by pursuing Mohini. But just before he does, Vishnu transforms back into his original form and teaches Shiva a little about his nature and the nature of Maya. And that is that emotions are difficult to overcome, and thus Maya, illusion, will forever be a part of Shiva's nature, which is of course endings. And if that sounds quite complicated, in short, it is the notion of endings are closely bound to our emotions. They begin and end, the neurochemicals surge and retreat. Yet both are an illusion, and they're both a part of this material realm, Malkuth. And that actually all there ever is consciousness and the present moment in which it is in, which is, of course, in this tale, Vishnu. But the irony is that creates the illusion that it's not, and that is Vishnu turning into Mohini. So there's quite a bit to go through there. It's quite a complex card, as the 10s always tend to be, as they wrap up the suit. But now we're going to go into the divinatory interpretations of the card. So, in divination, the 10 of Cups is both safety and the fullness of emotion and being. And whether this is for good or ill, both concepts are, of course, as we've discussed, an illusion in Malkuth. Crowley put this illusion as thus: the pursuit of pleasure has been crowned with perfect success, and constantly it is discovered that having got everything that one wanted, one did not want it at all. And this is a very similar concept to what we saw in the 4 of Cups, whereby when we attain what we feel we need in the material realm, we often discover it was only what we wanted, and actually all we need is ourselves. When well dignified, the card represents the lasting emotional success of things, peacemaking, generosity, warmth, and optimism. Indeed, it is a very good card to pull for long-lasting relationships. However, when it is ill-dignified, the card is wasteful, delusional, pitiful, sentimental, and lacks spiritual fulfillment. So that has been the 10 of Cups. I hope you have enjoyed what you've seen or listened to today. And if you did, please do hit that like button, as it really does help the channel. And if you want to see future videos of me going through the Thoth Tarot deck, as well as going through the different spreads of the tarot, which I do tutorials on, and readings for all the zodiac signs, please do hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos. So that has been the 10 of Cups. Thank you very much again for watching this video, and may peace be upon you all, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.